Thank you very much, Sarit. Thank you, everybody. It is a pleasure to see such a large audience with us, and many are watching us online. I think it's going to be a very important day when we talk about Iran. Ultimately, the goal of the Iranian regime is not a secret. After all, Iran explicitly says what it wants. It wants to take over the Middle East. It wants to be the ruler, the Shiite Persian ruler of the area. It wants to destroy the state of Israel, and it also wants to overthrow all the governments, the Sunni Shiite governments that oppose this vision and that stand in its way. And after that, it also wants to expand its influence even more in the world. It wants to build an empire that is going to work towards bringing the messianic leader. Now, this is such a radical goal, and therefore in the West, they don't take it seriously. It's actually not logical. It doesn't make sense for a country to behave in this way. And that's as far as the Iranian regime is concerned and the IRGC, that is exactly what is underlying their vision and their goal. And therefore, I think and I believe that everything we'll talk about today will be the how. I've told you what the goal is, but now we'll talk about how they're going to achieve this goal. And we're going to hear a lot about that today. Generally, I'll say that I can identify several main tools for achieving this vision. First one is the proxies that Iran has established throughout the Middle East. They're all trained and operated by Tehran and the RGC and the Quds Force, and there are various levels of coordination. Next is the nuclear program. And third is the program that is about the missiles and the UAVs. These are the three main tools for realizing the Iranian vision, and each of them serves the other ones. For example, Iran is making quick progress in its nuclear plan. It is very worrying, and they're crossing a lot of red lines with it, and there is no answer. No solution for this, while the Hamas and Hezbollah proxies are keeping Israel busy. And we can see how this Iranian network is working when one component serves the progress of another component. Ultimately, Iran would like for there to be a nuclear umbrella over all its proxies. And in this way, both Iran and the proxies will be able to act very brazenly while deterring Israel. By the way, I published, as Sarit just said, a relatively detailed report about the Iranian nuclear progress, and I recommend that people read it because they will find a summary, a wide summary. And when you put all of these points together, you can really see how Iran is exploiting or using the fact that its proxies are keeping the international community busy in order to make progress with its nuclear program, just as I just explained. What I'd like to do now is actually move on to our speakers. So this way we'll be okay with the timetables. We're going to begin with Boaz Shapira. He's a researcher at the Alma Center. In the past year, he's focusing on the Iranian Revolutionary Guards. In recent months, he published reports about them, including the Navy of the IRGC. And I think that is the most thorough report that exists publicly on this issue. He also gathers a lot of information about the ground forces of the IRGC, about the Quds Force, the Basij. He lives in Ramat HaGolan, the Golan Heights. He lives in the north. And Boaz, the floor is yours. Good morning. Thank you for being with us today. This was a serious build-up, what Yaakov said. I will try to very generally tell you about this organization that's called IRGC, but more in the aspect of where it gets its force from, what its intensity is. What we're going to hear is just the very tip of the iceberg. As Lapin said, we are now publishing reports that will mainly review the military arms as deeply as possible, as thoroughly as possible. And I suggest that you read that and you'll be able to learn more. Now we've been hearing about the IRGC in the context, in the military context. We've heard Israeli attacks in Syria, exposure of underground bases, drills where they shoot missiles. Something else that's a bit more prominent recently is the matter of ships. We've seen it in the Persian Gulf and also in the Red Sea, taking over, helping the Houthis, sending UAVs. That has been very prominent until recent weeks. The Iranian attack that we saw about 3 or 4 weeks ago, that was already closer to home. And it also gave us a much more tangible demonstration of what this organization can actually do, because ultimately this organization is about 1,500 kilometers away, and they managed a barrage of 100 ballistic missiles and 300 projectiles in all. And in total, they came here and they were well-timed. And that is not something you can disregard, but you have to understand that this is an organization that's much more than just military capabilities. It's a tremendous organization. They have economic arms, many fields that it is involved in. Almost everything in Iran is something they're involved in. They have an economic empire of about 250 or 300 billion. And in addition to that, they're also controlling sectors within Iran, politics, economics, the legal system, culture. And they also have a very big influence, very large influence on the implementation and design of Iran's foreign policy and its conduct in the area. To make it a bit simpler, I made I roughly divided it into a military aspect and a political civilian aspect, but you'll see they're both connected to one another, and each enables the operations of the other. If you're familiar with Hezbollah, it's actually very similar to what goes on there. The military supports the civilian and vice versa. That is very generally speaking. Let me just review, if you're not familiar with it. The IRGC was founded according to a direct order by Khomeini. They were built as a military force with two aims. One is to protect the regime and the values of the ideology of the revolution, and second is disseminating the ideas outside of Iran. They were probably supposed to also replace the military, but the Iran-Iraq war got in the way of that. So we're talking about a Republic Guard of sorts, responsible to squash oppression from within, and externally they are a tool that can implement the interests of the regime. They started out small in the 1980s during the Iran-Iraq war. They became much bigger. They got more budgets, more manpower, more fields of responsibility, more activity. And in this context, that is when their military arms were established. The Navy, the Aerospace Force, the Quds Force, etc. And according to various estimates, they have about 150 to 200,000 people that serve in the IRGC. That does not include the Basij. These are semi-military, semi-civilian militias that, when needed, they are recruited. You can see them often when they're trying to squash protests. So now, when you look at Iran, they have two parallel concurrent military forces. One is the Iranian military, like any other army, the military that you would know, and on the other hand, we have the IRGC. Officially, they both report to the head of the armed forces of Iran, but de facto, the army is a lot less prepared, gets less quality tasks, and actually the more prominent one is the IRGC. IRGC also has much better ties with the government, much more influence. For example, you can see that in the Quds Force, they What they do, the military doesn't usually know about, and they report directly and work according to the direct orders of the supreme leader. Now, they have become stronger in the 2000s, mainly with regard to procurement. China, Russia, North Korea, Syria, all of them sell missiles to them and ships and anything they can get their hands on. And concurrently, they're also beginning a long-term strategic process in these years of establishing their infrastructures for knowledge and manufacturing. They understand that it's very difficult to obtain weapons, and they'd rather do it by themselves. They don't want to depend on others. It's actually quite similar to what's happening here. We're also talking here in Israel about doing things independently. What does that look like? When you look at it, often you'll see some kind of a weapon, an aircraft or a missile, and you can see that Iran took something that exists and then they reverse engineer it. They perform some sorts of developments, and then they declare and announce this is ours. We talked about it a lot in our reports, also in the Navy report. This includes a lot of missiles, many torpedoes. These are actually local versions of weapons from North Korea or Russia. Sometimes fun is being made of them. Sometimes you can see various cardboard models, and people would say, this is nonsense, but it is important to remember that there is very significant progress that they make, certainly in the past decade. In many fields, you can see that in systems for propulsion and navigation of missiles, they use materials that are more complex than just metals. They have very significant infrastructures. They have the ability to manufacture submarines and ships. You have to remember it's a big country with a lot of capabilities, so they should not be disregarded. And even now, despite their efforts, they're still not independent. They still depend a lot on components that do not exist in Iran. For example, they depend on Russia with regard to missiles. They depend on North Korea when they want materials for the nuclear program, bits that they need to procure for UAVs and for missiles. But generally speaking, you can say that their trend for them has been successful. In other words, now Iran manufactures a lot of its weapon systems by itself. I'm talking about rifles, and I'm talking about helmets, the most basic things, and then also trucks and UAVs, and also the ballistic missiles and the cruise missiles that we saw, very impressive ships and also submarines. Iran even sells weapons to other countries. This is part of what Iran manufactures that you can see here. You can see the submarine, for example. This is originally from North Korea, but now it is entirely manufactured in Iran. These are new ships from the past year or 18 months. Each has about 15 missiles. I'm talking about anti-tank missiles. I'm talking about torpedoes, about cruise missiles. They have fast ships that can shoot, launch missiles. They're very impressive capabilities. With regard to what they manufacture, they don't only sell UAVs to Russia and sell manufacturing infrastructures to them. This, for example, is a ship in Venezuela. This is really the back door of the United States. These are anti-ship missiles. We know that they have even more significant capabilities there. They even negotiated with other countries, for example, Bolivia, to sell UAVs to them. Their capabilities are not bad at all. And in all of this, the IRGC has a very central role. It is in charge of a lot of these arrays, responsible for the proliferation of it all. They're also in charge of the nuclear program, including any and all aspects. All of these things are a tremendous operation. They're also in charge of the missile program. They now have more than 20 types of ballistic missiles and cruise missiles. Some of them go as far as 2,000 kilometers, some even further. There's also a space program with several types of launches. They already positioned several launches. Some of the UAVs are of the IRGC, and they're the ones who transfer these capabilities to the Houthis and to Hezbollah. We also talked about the ships, and also the aerial defense array is theirs, even though it does rely on Russian versions. But as we said, their role does not amount only to within Iran. They also have outside capabilities. They are very thoroughly involved in many countries of the region: Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen. We're very familiar with that. I'm not only talking about military involvement, also political involvement, and also the Gaza Strip, Sudan, Afghanistan, Eritrea, Algeria, Judea and Samaria, and really the entire Middle East and beyond. In these places, they build up militias and they give them weapons, and they have experts there. In Syria, for example, just in the past few months, Iranian experts were killed in attacks of the Liechtenstein force. This is really an effect that is just expanding more and more, and we expect to see more of it. Now, in all of these arenas, the military efforts are also accompanied by civil efforts. What does that mean? When they go into Syria, Lebanon, or Iraq, they also they set up schools and religious institutions and educational institutions. They help the population because they'd like the population to become dependent on them. They rehabilitate buildings. You can see that in Syria. Beyond that, IRGC has activity that we're familiar with in South America, in Africa, in Asia, various projects, for example, hydroelectric dams and rehabilitation of infrastructures, and they also they also have criminal activity. For example, drug cartels, and it sounds ridiculous, but we're talking about billions of dollars, and that is the military aspect. The other part of the puzzle, that is the civilian part, that is also very much responsible for this force, the power of the IRGC. We talked about buying weapons in the 1980s, 1990s. There is also a process where the IRGC are becoming stronger within Iran. We said they're actually the strongest entity in the country, and there are several main ways in which they did this. I will speak about them in a nutshell. First of all, they became involved in the government. Previous senior officers find themselves within the government institutions, and they bring in their friends. This is also supported by more conservative people in the system. The other thing is a small company that they set up that was designed to rehabilitate damage caused by the war. Now there are tremendous corporations, and they work in agriculture, high-tech, infrastructures, minerals, energy. They're involved in all of that. It is the executive engineering arm of the regime. It is economically extremely important. They also work outside of Iran, not only inside Iran, and they too are involved both in the nuclear program and in the entire weapons industry. And civilly, they also support universities and banks. They're very versatile. And they additionally control also, that's the third way they do this, they have charity organizations and religious institutions and economic institutions. This means, as I said, that wherever you go in Iran, you'll find something that is to do with the IRGC. This is all very convenient. It's a great cover. It allows to bypass sanctions and limitations. It is a very good way for them to bring in money, including foreign currency, into Iran. And it also allows to perform activity and operations outside of Iran. Things such as establishing terrorist infrastructures, and also the ability to purchase dual-use technologies, as we published in one of our reports. Another aspect of all of this is that it allows very tight supervision of the economy and the population. So IRGC are actually present everywhere in Iran, both physically and also ideologically. People know that there is always supervision going on and control. We're talking about 30 to 80% control of the economy, hundreds of billions of dollars. And if I conclude, because Lapine has been looking at me, their power is because of their special role in the government, and because they were smart enough to establish themselves both in the civilian aspect and economically, politically, and on the other hand, significant military power. They are everywhere in the government systems, in society, and they know how to hold on to the system as they want. There is a mechanism in Iran where the regime needs the IRGC and therefore supports it, and it becomes stronger and increases this dependence. And this is a kind of a circular mechanism that strengthens them and reinforces them. It can be seen by senior officers that have power positions within the regime. And I would have shown you this, but we don't have the time. But really, the conclusion is that wherever you throw a stone, you'll find the IRGC in Iran. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Boaz. We'll have some time for Q&A a little later on. And you are all, of course, welcome to ask questions, and you'll be able to elaborate further. Thank you so much, Boaz. I am now proud to invite Mr. Tal Be'eri, the Director of the Research Department in Alma Center. He'll be talking about the corridor from Iran to Iraq and Syria, all the way to Lebanon, 1,750 kilometers of corridor, which is basically the operative realization of the Iranian vision to export the revolution across the Middle East. So that's what we're talking about. And now we know what the what is. Now we're going to learn about how. And I'm very happy to invite Tal Be'eri to the podium. Good morning. Thank you so much for coming. It really is so exciting to be standing here before you. I'd like to talk to you in the next few minutes about the Iranian military activity in Syria, and I'd like to focus primarily on the weapon smuggling corridor from Iran through Iraq, Syria, all the way to Lebanon, and on what is known as the CERS, C-E-R-S, Institute, which is really the Advanced Weapon Development Institute on Syrian soil. What is the corridor from Iran? The corridor basically goes through Iraq and Syria and leads to Lebanon. We're talking about 1,850 kilometers, give or take. And those who have want to do that, you can actually rent a car in Tehran, travel 25 hours, and reach Lebanon. In fact, this corridor is the realization, the operative realization of the Iranian vision to export the revolution, the Islamic revolution, across the Middle East. This corridor, and this is where you're going to get understand the importance of it, the importance that the Iranian regime attributes to this corridor. This corridor is operated by the same people that Boaz talked about before me, the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. And the realization of this corridor is expressed not only in military aspects, which we'll talk about in just a moment, but also from economic aspects and religious aspects. In terms of the economic aspects, it allows the Iranians, or let's say it a different way, as funny as it might sound, this corridor allows us, Israel, to eat Iranian pistachio nuts. And how does that happen? Because Iranian goods travel through this corridor that you see here on the slide and get through Syria and Turkey to Europe and across the world. So there's actually a mechanism in place that can actually bypass sanctions if certain goods are sanctioned. So in terms of the religion, this corridor allows pilgrims, Shiite pilgrims, to travel by bus, by vehicle, by car, and reach Syria. Very holy site to Shiites, headed by Saida Zaneb, which is in southern Damascus. I think we don't even need to mention the fact that the economic and religious aspects of this corridor, the Iranians, as they usually do, they exploit it also and use it for other things, for military purposes. And all of this religious and economic activity is in fact another cover, another front for the military activity, which really is the crown jewel, which really is the reason why this corridor is used, which is transferring weapons and militants from Iran to Iraq and Syria, and from there to Lebanon. In fact, from 2017 onwards, Syria has been defined as the key area in the jigsaw puzzle of this corridor and is strategically defined. And we see from 2017 onwards, over the last 7 years, that the main military effort by Iran is focused on entrenching and establishing this corridor in Syria. And how do they do that? Well, the method begins with creating, or rather generating and establishing, geographic anchors throughout Syrian territory where the routes go, the land corridor routes. It's actually paths, it's roads that the corridor goes through. And in fact, these geographic anchors become Iranian entrenchment territories for all intents and purposes. If you see, for example, on the map, I'm sorry we cannot hear the speaker, he's not speaking to a microphone, just one moment please. On the map you can see the entire path leading from Iran through Iraq, as I've mentioned, and going through El-Bukamal, or the El-Bukamal region. And the reason they do that through El-Bukamal is simply because they have a small problem called the United States, which is deployed in the El Tanef region and does not allow the Iranians to cross through that area, which would have been a shorter route towards Syria and Lebanon. That's why they go through Al-Bukamal, which they view as an essential area to go through. So this entire strip between Al-Bukamal and Al-Mayadin and through there to Syria and Lebanon. And as you can see, the Iranians have marked geographic anchors such as the Al-Bukamal strip, such as Aleppo, such as Palmyra, such as Homs and Damascus. And there, in these geographic anchors, they entrench themselves civically, or from a civil perspective, ultimately in order to get to a point where they gain and garner the population's sympathy, and thereby entrenching themselves. And this civilian entrenchment provides the population with civil services, social services, anything that you can imagine. All these NGOs and associations that Boaz mentioned before that allows for their military entrenchment and establishment through these Shiite militia groups that we keep hearing about. And in these areas of the corridor, and in fact the most basic role that these militia groups have is really securing, from a military perspective, this corridor and allowing the transfer both of goods, also the travel of pilgrims, and of course weapons. Now this corridor, this passage, this transfer of weapons to Syria, as I've said, is carried out primarily through these long land routes which are marked in red on the map. But there are also two other routes. Naval route, which is just using ships, sea vessels, commercial sea vessels, and also not commercial ones, that leave Iranian ports and go through international sea routes, the Suez Canal, the Mediterranean, and get to Latakia, Tartus, and from there they can unload what they unload, and of course I'm talking about in the military sense about weapons. And there's another route, the air route, which means using an aircraft that takes off in Iran and lands in Syria and all sorts of places, all sorts of possibilities. It's primarily Damascus, but it can also be Aleppo, it can also be Deir ez-Zor. And that's basically those are basically the three main routes that this huge corridor operation we see on the map uses. These Iranian routes, these routes are being operated by Iran like an accordion. What does it mean? Sometimes they expand the land operation and minimize or reduce the naval and air. And on the other hand, at other times they will expand the naval at the expense of the land and air, or expand the air at the expense of the land and naval. So this is all due to operative constraints the Iranians have, that of course someone imposes on them, someone forces them to change this accordion type of method that they're doing. Someone disrupts them on land, so they move to sea. If somebody disrupts them on sea, then they move to air, and so on, and round again. And we really researched this, and we saw that over a period of time, several years, you can see constant changes, constant shifts in the intensity of the use of each route. And when you put all this intensity together and you connect it to all sorts of mysterious attacks launched by someone or other, you understand the context of this accordion, where you expand in air, where you expand on sea, and where do you expand on land. And we must understand that ultimately Iran's flexibility on land is limited. Because as I've said, the main entry point to Syria is through this geographic strip that begins in El Bukamal and gets to Deir Azur. And this is the main strip that they enter through, usually through El Bukamal, through to Iraq. And that creates a constraint, operatively speaking, because if we know that someone only enters from one point, it's very easy to just wait for them and capture them, or start monitoring them and following them from that place. And so they had to kind of play the game of flexibility through the naval routes and through the air routes. And the Iranians, in fact, provided all sorts of solutions, all sorts of alternatives that are more hidden. It's like a front or a cover. Here you see the Banyas port. The Banyas port is the oil port in Syria, between Latakia and Tartus. Oil ships get there. Many Iranian oil ships reach that port. They still do. To the Banyas port, and in fact we suspect, it is highly likely, that this port uses as an entry point for the smuggling of weapons from Iran to Syria and Lebanon under the cover of these oil ships. March 11th, 2024. I want to ask you a simple question. What was a senior Navy officer called Rad Zarai, an Iranian naval officer, what was he doing in Banyas, near or east of the Banyas? What was he doing there, this man, Rad Zarai, a senior officer in the IRGC Navy? He was there on March 11th, 2024. What was he doing there? That's my question. Let me answer. That we think it is very likely that this Rada Zarai, this senior officer, which is like a colonel, that's his rank, he in fact was in charge of receiving various weapon systems that have to do with the development of naval capabilities, Hezbollah's naval capabilities probably. Such systems could have to do with radar stations, with anti-ship missiles, cruise missiles. And how did that equipment get there? And why was he specifically there at the Banyas? Well, you can see it on the slide. It's more than just a clue. It's the Banyas port, of course. I talked about the sea, which is being, or the naval routes being an alternative for land routes, but what about the air? We know that the Damascus International Airport, someone keeps bombing it, both the civil tracks and airway and different international areas. It's constantly being harmed, it's constantly being bombed. No aircraft can land there. So we suspect that there is utilization of Russian infrastructure on Syrian soil for Iran. I don't need to tell you I don't need to explain and to expand on the collaboration between Russia and Iran. And we believe that the Russian base in Khmeimim is actually used as an airport for Iranian use in Syria because of this relationship, this collaboration, this give and take between Iran and Russia. And it is used in order to smuggle Iranian weapons to Syria, when in fact it is defined as a safe zone. And by the way, if you don't know, this base, Khmeimim, is 19 kilometers south of Latakia. It is an air base, which is actually an international airport called Basel al-Assad, which is not operational, no longer active. And this safe zone, because of the huge Russian presence there, is used and utilized by Iran. And we began suspecting that this was so in May 2023. It was then that we identified a very unusual activity of a 747 Boeing aircraft, Iranian aircraft, that landed in that airport 6 times. And there were very few landings of aircraft apart from the Russians' use. It was an international airport that was desolate for a long time. Was not used, it was only used by Russians. The only use until February 2023 was for help when aircraft came to help because of the earthquake. Of course, all sorts of Iranian flights, and you can imagine what perhaps were on the aircraft coming in from Iran. It was supposed to be aid for the earthquake, but you can probably imagine what was there. The Iranians used the earthquake to use and to smuggle weapons into Syria. And this activity, this Iran Air Boeing, how come it landed there 6 times in Khmeimim? And add to that the landing of an Illusion 76, which you can see here. This is the Iran Air Boeing. It is a transport air jet, and here you can see this one at the bottom. This one here you can see the same aircraft in Moscow, and this Illusion kept landing in Khmeimim aircraft. And there's also an Airbus, a Yazid Airways company Airbus, a brand new company that just suddenly showed up. And when we looked into it, we discovered that it was associated with Mahan Air. You all know Mahan Air. It is an official, so to speak, airline, which is a cover airline for the IRGC and is used to transfer weapons. I don't know, I can't tell you whether the Russians are ignoring this deliberately, this Iranian weapons smuggling into Syria, but I can say that it is very likely that Iran is smuggling weapons through this aircraft, through this airport into Syria, and using this in a situation. And there's another Russian interest here, and I'm going to move on to the next topic in terms of providing Iranian weapons. This interest is called the CRS Institute. This institute ultimately develops weapons and manufactures weapons, and that can get Khmeimim from there to Syria. But let's put that aside. We've talked about that enough. Let's talk about CERS itself, or SSRC as it is known in English. The French acronym is CRS. On March 31st, we saw that the sites there in Syria, the main military industry sites in Syria, have been bombed several times. And due to these attacks, we know that weapons that were stored there have been destroyed. We know that some of the projects have been stopped. We know that some of the position holders have been detained. But ultimately, this activity was not thwarted. And in fact, it seems that the entire activity campaign against the center is sort of like putting out fires, extinguishing fires, because some of these fires may have been quite large, but ultimately CERS continues and continues to operate and overcomes all the damage caused to it. And I want to come and say something very simple here. Israel must attack and strike and completely demolish and destroy all the CERS Institute infrastructure and sites on Syrian soil, and the sooner the better. And I'm saying that very totally because we want this attack to be very, very broad. This institute is very important for the Iranians. They have taken over this institute completely for two main reasons. One, the CERS Institute is a growth engine for weapon development, advanced weapons that Iran can use on Syrian soil. And the second thing is that CERS is actually a function that bypasses the entire corridor. It saves all the trouble. If development, especially by the 4000 Institute it was part of the CRS. It allows Iran, through CRS infrastructure, to develop its weapons, its precise rockets and missiles, its cruise missiles, its UAVs, all for Hezbollah and Shiite militia groups, or perhaps for other places around the world, who knows. And ultimately, this activity on Syrian soil in the CRS Institute saves the Iranians trouble and shortens the route and means less logistics, means less manufacturing of weapons. In all of this 1,850 kilometers, it's a shortcut. And it also makes it easier for them to carry out their military security defense activity, securing this entire corridor, because it is just simply already in Syria. And from Syria, it's so short to transfer it to Hezbollah and to the militia groups. So the bottom line is, in the CRS context, is that this institute is an integral part of the corridor. It is a strategic asset for the Iranians, and in this context we simply have to destroy it completely. And just two final points. The matter of chemical weapons. The CERS Center is a place where chemical weapons was developed. We're going to talk about the importance of that for Hezbollah, but this is yet another reason why. And then back in 2013, even though they said so, it was not actually resolved. And unfortunately, Syria in CERS Institute still has the knowledge and the chemical weapons that also need to be addressed. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Tal, for this fascinating presentation on crucial information that the world, international community, and the public at large should know. And I'm now very happy to invite Miri Eisen, who is currently the director of the ICT, of the Counter Terror Institute. She has held various positions. She was also the Prime Minister's international media consultant, and she lectures around the world about geopolitics, and we're going to talk about the uniformity of arenas, and I will let you expand, Miri.
What you see from here, I don't see from there. That is This is going to be strange because I'm going to describe it in Hebrew, the English of the Persian, because I'd like to go from these fascinating presentations of what is now about the hardware on the ground. I'm going to talk about the middle ground, which is the issue of information, because Iran, I will talk about unity of arenas and also about the very physical attack by Iran against Israel in April. The reason I'm showing this is because it's from the El-Quds Day in April 2024, and I'd like to look back. There is two main things I'd like to talk about when we talk about Iran. Yes, you're right. Thank you. Because this is where it says April 3rd, So I'm showing you Tehran Times, and I'm talking about Quds Day with a Palestinian flag. And I'd like to remind everybody that already before the Al-Quds Force was established, concurrently with the IRGC being established, beginning to be established, the Ayatollah Khomeini, not Khamenei, declared the Al-Quds Day as the last Friday in the Ramadan month. It was so many years ago, so much in the beginning of the revolution, so relevant to the ideology of the reaching these values. Since then, we had the idea of Al-Quds and Jerusalem in general. So, of course, when the RGC established the exporting force, this exporting force that is called IRGC, its name is Quds. It is lovely in terms of the word, because we all understand that El Quds means holy. In Arabic, we all know that the united capital forever of Jerusalem, Western Jerusalem, is called Quds in Arabic. When it's translated into English every time, and here it's in Tehran time, so they called it Quds Day, but abroad, often I see that it's translated in English, both with regard to the Al-Quds Force and the Al-Quds Day. Sometimes they'll say Jerusalem Day, and sometimes they'll say Holy Days, because that is the literal translation, and I'd like to talk about that, because there's two aspects I want to talk about. In this war, since October 7th, Iran is, with its information warfare, has been unifying the arenas since day one. I'm not saying that Iran planned this and solicited for this, and because of it, Hamas attacked. But since October 7th, already on that very day, we can fully see the Iranian strength that is reflected in the information war. We'll talk about the proxies later, but when I talk about the information war, not all of us are aware of the tremendous influence that it has. And this is why I want to give you some example, because we're living alongside it all the time. On Al-Quds Day, and this is designed for the wide audience, when I talk about the Iranian goal, what they're doing now, how they're exporting it, I'm not just looking back 45 years. 45 years. I'm talking about 2024. What they said in 2024, you can see we are on the International Quds Day.
Continuation of the principled and constant policy of the Islamic Republic of Iran in supporting, Chaverim, the liberation struggles and legitimate resistance of the Palestinian nation. אני שונאת אפילו להקריא את זה. And the necessity of effective, comprehensive, and deterrent counteraction against the crimes, עכשיו אנחנו מגיעים אלינו, of the occupying and child-killing Zionist regime.
Guys, they issued this on April 3rd on the Al-Quds Day in 2024. So when I talk about the information war, with regard to unity of arenas, what Iran is publishing in English on its behalf, on its proxy, they're backing this, but they're also leading this, because this terminology is terminology that we fully see in the information warfare of all of the arenas around us. The Houthis speak in this way. Various Hezbollah in Iraq and in Lebanon speak in this manner. And I will tie this up with the Hamas matter. And I will show you how it's connected to the information warfare, because when I talk about what they do vis-a-vis us in this current war, so we already talked about the guy who died. And when we, yes, Tal, you talked about him, and I'm just showing this photo. These, you can see three figures here, and at this point, we're pretty much familiar with them. Qasem Soleimani, most of us know him. This one, foreign sources say that Israel killed him in December 2023. And this man, the whole world says, not Israel, loud and clear, but he died at the heart of Damascus on April 1, 2024. And what we see in this picture on the left, when I talk about expanding the range and the dimensions in which Iran is attacking, it's not just the military capabilities that were clearly presented. It's not just the corridor via land, sea, and air that we talked about. It is actually a war that is in the realm of the information. All of us are part of it. Sarit, are they going to show the video today? How long ago was it? 3 days ago? 3 days ago, Hezbollah released a clip about the Alma Center. I thought it was funny. You need some sense of humor. And I said, let's show it to everybody. And Natan and Sarit, they're leading actors in it. Even I'm there. But you have to understand the influence of this information arena. This is something that the Islamic Revolution does very forcefully. This idea of Al-Quds Day, that was there long before October 7th. This idea of using within this Tehran medium, this poster itself, that you can see that hanging in the billboards in the Palestine Square. This was what we call before, and after that came the Al-Quds Day, and he said, we're causing you to feel bad for what happened. Their Hebrew is not great. We're laughing at them, but you need to remember, they wrote in Hebrew in Tehran on April 1st before they attacked. And this issue of the centrality of the information warfare, that is something we can see from everywhere around us. Let's look further. I will now show this in this context because as far as I'm concerned, the actual information warfare, especially in the context of Hamas and the Palestinian issue, Israel, and I'm saying this politely, doesn't do much. But most of us are not aware that behind not the Palestinians per se, but even before them, there has been this Iranian entity. People say to me, Sunnis, Shiites, the idea of Al-Quds and Palestine and the liberation, they've been doing that for 45 years already. And now look what Miri finds from various places, and that's why I took from Sputnik. I took the name, I don't know how much this got coverage in Israel with regard to the name that Iranians gave their attack on the 13th, 14th. They called it Operation True Promise. Look how deep this goes. This idea, what are they talking about? Real hope? A promise. What a positive word. True promise. And that's the name they gave the attack by Iran against Israel. And you can see all the various breaking news items and all the various aspects. But let's talk about information warfare that is reflected in various ways in the recent weeks. Israel showed all of the places that we were attacked in. This was an official publication of the State of Israel in April. It was one of the first things that were published, because what are we supposed to feel? The entire country is being attacked. Now, wear different glasses. Look, Iran attacked the entire country. But look, this is from the Iranian news agency in English. Your next mistake will be the end of your fraudulent country. In the same Palestine Square on April 14th in Tehran. They're talking to us, to the audience here in Israel, in Kibbutz Lochamei HaGetaot. It's in Hebrew. Who else can read it except for us? So they made sure that the world gets their message. And then Israel said, you know what? This is what we did. I have a lot of criticism about a lot of these things that we do in Israel. Statistics, and more statistics. This is information warfare. Look what Iran published on that day, reading in English. We're now talking to people about world records. This looks the coolest, the biggest drone attack, largest missile attack. This is terminology that when you read it, you immediately understand that this is the very top that they could have reached. It's merely a slide, but you can see the picture. And they have a hashtag punishing the aggressor. This connects directly to the framing of this war, and it all is interconnected. This is not something new. This is in the Tehran Times, what I'm showing you now. Both of them, it's on the day after. One of them is Israel repeats its folly. Next step will be fearsome. This is all from what Tehran publishes in English in the information warfare. They don't want to influence us, Israel, or the Persians. No, they want to influence English speakers, all the English speakers that are here. And de facto, with regard to this is a bit more complex. This reminds me of Soleimani's hand after the attack. That's all that was left. But this is me in that disgusting photo. I apologize. Your next mistake, I mentioned that. And I'd like to finish off with this issue because Iran, like hybrid terrorist organizations, as a state, Iran as a state, entity, it is constantly striving for legitimacy. The first thing that David said here today, and that is at the core of the Alma's work, it's the matter of delegitimizing Israel. It's not just the Palestinians that do this to me. There's a country constituting of 90 million people that have all of the capabilities of the industries that we heard about and all these manufacturing facilities that they take from sales, that they take from the industrial industry, the military industry in Iran. There's so much work has been conducted about this. Both Microsoft and Google studied this matter of dissemination of information in the social networks. That has all been studied. So why is this specifically interesting to us? This permanent mission of Iran, they sit in New York, inside the United Nations. What they're trying to show us here, we are legitimate. The illegitimate ones, and this is the difference between legitimate and legal. It's not exactly the same. And look what they're saying, reading in English. We hardly answer this matter. In general, in Israel, we tend to think we're right and they're wrong, and then everybody will eventually understand, and then we call that public diplomacy. This is a well-timed, very aggressive campaign that affects all of us. I've showed you just the tip of the iceberg of what the Iranians have been doing in the past 6 months, and this is an integral part of the future of all of us. I just had a few minutes, so that's what I could show you. Thank you very much, Miri. I'm inviting you to sit back down together with Boaz and Tal that will join you, and now we're going to go to the stage of Q&A. Yes, I'd also like a chair. Thank you very much. Why not? They say it's healthier to stand. Before we begin with questions from the audience, I'd like to ask one of my own questions. I'd like to ask Miri. First of all, thank you very much for the fascinating review. Here is my question. We know that in the Middle East, the messaging and the entire set of values will be different than that of the West. In your opinion, after Israel did manage to demonstrate technological supremacy, at least in the terms of the defense, and also as attackers, do you think the Iranian message became weaker in the Arabian countries? I mean, we saw that the Iranian threat is perceived as less forceful. Did Israel become stronger? I'm talking about the Arab world in the Middle East. Well, that's the question. Do you want me to give you the answer that you want to hear? No, please tell me what you really think. There is a tremendous difference between how countries see things, if we're talking about the regimes, and how the man on the street sees things. Hi, I live in the Middle East. There is a matter that is called the conspiracy, and therefore it's difficult to answer this question. It's not that Iran became weaker, because the conspiracy that was then talked about was, we knew this in advance. This became, it is reducing, and this is based on what Iran said. Iran said, we did something very small. We could have sent 3,000, not the 300 that we sent. And that means that in terms of the people on the street, they think they're still strong. Iran is still strong. But states do believe that Israel's investments in these preventative measures, if on October 7th there was such a tremendous failing compared to what was invested, then on April 14th, it was the success of the Israeli capabilities, and that meant something. Now it is already 1 month later, and the effects of these things are very short term. That means also with regard to the Iranian unity of arenas against us, those who are against us, the Iranian attack succeeded to unite with us, those who are against Iran. That worked, but it was there for a very short period of time. Questions from the audience, please? My name is Hania Beris. I'm a journalist of a Spanish a newspaper, as you can hear by my accent, in Latin America, in Spain. I'd like to ask Miri, did I understand correctly from the tone of your words that you are criticizing our addressing of Iran's intense war of information? I will ask my next question, Boaz. Maybe you can guess what I'd like to know, especially I'm from Uruguay originally, but this is to do with Latin America that is very relevant to me. Maybe if you think this is not going to interest everybody, you can talk to me during the break, but I'd like to know about the ship that was sold to Venezuela. You said negotiating UAVs with Bolivia. Can you say a little bit more about that? And Tal, a question for you. With this fascinating, amazing description that you gave us, is it maybe still possible to say that the entire war between the campaign between the wars, that we did succeed? I mean, I'm thinking you probably can't quantify it, but can we still say that we succeeded in all of the attacks of the Liechtenstein Air Force? Did we succeed to somehow make things smaller or slower, that Iran is a lot less established in Syria because they're being hurt? Or did we achieve nothing? We'll answer in the same order of the questions. I think that the state of Israel is definitely failing with regard to the system, the information warfare. I will not say any more about that, but I think we are failing. We can definitely do things differently. It's a decision, and I'm so sorry to say that I disagree 200% with what we've been doing. With regard to Iran's activity in South America, first of all, they're not hiding it. We heard people talk for several months back now that they want to reach Panama. They want to go to the Northern Pole to succeed there. And in Venezuela, there's collaborations with regard to smuggling oil and oil tanks, both militarily. And there's also the civilian aspect of building infrastructures in Nicaragua, in Bolivia. We can see negotiations with some other countries that support this access. And the message that needs to be conveyed is the backyard of the United States. In other words, a ship of Venezuela or Iran, whichever, that sails around Venezuela shores will reach Miami. The same course of action can happen in Miami Beach as well. They don't hide this, and you can see it very clearly in the area of Brazil and Uruguay, there in the three borders. You can see Hezbollah operations. It is not covert operation. It is criminal activity that is extremely out in the open and backed by Iran, with Iranian presence on the ground. So the answer to you is yes. not enough exposure, definitely not relatively to the threat that they're creating there. This is an excellent question because ultimately I will ask you back, did terrorism ever stop? Israel is the country that works against terrorism more than any other country in the world. They neutralize and they arrest. We neutralize and arrest, and we have wars and campaigns, and terrorism has never stopped. So, what's the solution? To stop doing what we've been doing? No. Ultimately, there's a certain threshold that you maintain. One day there will be a total war, but maybe this kind of activity will prevent types of things that we will not want to experience in this overall war. Let me tell you statistically, 70% or so of the attempts that we're familiar with, and that's important, the ones we're familiar with, where attempts were made to transfer weapons. So 70% of these attempts that we know of, Liechtenstein was able to handle them. But there are 30% of attempts where what they knew, they failed. And there's also another portion that they're not familiar with. But that's part of the war, and you can never stop the war. Any more questions? Yes, please. We'll come to you as well. I'll try to answer that question. I'll say, honestly, I have no idea. In terms of whether it increased or decreased, I don't know. We know the trend is going. Their input will be to some extent, but it made things easier for them, giving the $10 million of the oil money of that probably made things easier. I don't know if it changed the trend. It increases the attempts in other places, such as Algeria or Polisario, that maybe would have gotten less.
If I'm not mistaken, I think Iran is now exporting 2 million barrels a day for the first time since the cancellation of the Iranian nuclear agreement by the Trump administration. And that, of course, means that there's a lot of money flowing into the IRGC's coffers. And as we've all seen, that money goes to missiles, production, smuggling, terrorism. So I would hazard a guess that the lack of enforcement of sanctions, and it's the Chinese who are mainly buying this oil at a discount rate, is clearly going to nourish the Iranian war machine, and we're all going to see the consequence of that and are already probably seeing it in the region.
With regard to the sanctions, I can only say the following. I'm going to approach this from the other direction. Sanctions are good, but they never prevent. We've seen Iran continuing very nicely, even becoming stronger with very strong sanctions against it, because there are alternatives, substitutes. When the Western world in Europe and the United States understand that addressing the head of the octopus, which is actually the name of our panel here today, is only through something physical, a military action, everything will be better for the entire world. That is the only alternative. Sanctions maybe can be a supporting tool, but nothing beyond that. Only military action together will allow the world to contend and deal with these threats. Yes, please. I can't hear the questions. I apologize. He's not using a microphone. So you're asking this as if there is some kind of a simple answer. That was a very complex question. And ultimately, let me say this, I'm sitting here now. It is and my right when I sit here. But does anybody in this room, after everything we said, think that there is a simple solution? Let's wake up in the morning and attack Iran. Really? That's what you want to happen? I'm just saying this because it's as if either or dichotomous, there are sanctions, there are no sanctions. These are complex events, and especially with Iran, because this issue of legitimacy of a state entity, ultimately Hamas and Hezbollah, by the Western world, they recognized as terrorist organizations. Iran is sanctioned, but it is still a country that can come and speak at the United Nations. So I'm saying you're looking for a solution if we go crazy or something else, but we're also part of the world. We're also within this challenge of this and that and that. And I know I didn't give a clear answer because, in my opinion, there is no clear answer. And there's one more question now. First of all, thank you very much, Alma, for what you do, especially for today. First question for Tal, who talked about the corridor. Jordan, in the Iranian perspective, we saw the attack on Burj 22. And a question to you, Boaz. We recently heard the term from Iran, strategic patience. What is that? What does that mean after the April 14th attack? Jordan was always a fantasy for the Iranians. For many years, it has been that, both for Iran and Hezbollah. They established, and they have special purpose units to work with the Iranian arena. They know exactly the strategic ties between Jordan and Israel and the importance of Jordan to Israel. The corridor to date is reflected in something relatively small. The corridor is reflected mainly with regard to smuggling through Jordan territory. These are not secret. It's all was all published. We're talking about tie-breaking weapons that go to Judea and Samaria. I'm talking about anti-tank missiles and other weapons, and that's what Iranians try to develop now as a byproduct, secondary route of the corridor, because we do understand that these weapons come through the corridor to Syria and from there through the common border to Jordan, and from Jordan to Israel and to Judea and Samaria. Jordan is definitely something we need to pay attention to. We have to pay good attention to it. And Iranians are just waiting for this opportunity to use Jordan against us. Let me just add to this, a corridor that was not spoken about when you said smuggling. I thought that's where you were going, is that Hezbollah and Syria export through Jordan, and therefore there's an axis that you can see on other maps that very much affects Jordan as well, because they have been fighting that as hard as they can. With regard to the strategic patience, we don't have time, I'll be brief. Until now, it took 40-something years. It will take 40, 60, 80 more years. Ultimately, we'll get there. Well, Iran will get there. It doesn't have to happen tomorrow morning, even if the campaign with Hezbollah now, even if we destroy them tomorrow, it's okay. They'll build capabilities, Jordan again, Syria again, Gaza again, and ultimately we'll get there. About this perception of time of the enemy, it's critical. When we talk about Hezbollah before and after the second Lebanon war, we see that Hezbollah now is much stronger than it used to be, and that sort of fortifies their idea that if they're patient, then time is on their side. In that context, if we're talking about timelines, you should compare Israeli timelines. We're talking 10, 20, 50 years back. Sometimes somebody talks about the big rebellion of Bar Kokhba, but their reference is always hundreds and thousands of years back. that's like coffee, really. Thank you very much, everybody. Please come back.